When a pope dies, the Catholic Church doesn't just quietly move on to the next one. A very specific centuries-old process begins immediately, one with its own rituals, its own officials, and its own name for this strange in-between period, Sede Vacante, the empty seat. Over the next 15 minutes, we're going to walk through exactly what happens, step by step, from the moment a pope dies to the moment a new one steps onto that balcony in St. Peter's Square. Welcome to Pope Pulse. If you've ever wondered how the church actually handles this moment, not the movie version, the real one, this is that video. Subscribe if you want the rest of this series, because this is only the first piece of a much bigger process. The moment a pope dies, one Vatican official becomes the most important person in Rome, at least temporarily, the Camerlengo, or Chamberlain of the Holy Roman Church. Traditionally, the Camerlengo formally confirms the pope's death. In earlier centuries, this involved calling the pope's baptismal name 3 times and gently tapping his forehead with a small silver hammer, a ritual meant to make absolutely certain, in an age before modern medicine, that death had truly occurred. Today, death is confirmed medically, and the ritual has become largely symbolic. But the symbolism still matters in Catholic tradition. It's the formal official declaration that the papacy is now vacant, and it's the moment that sets everything else in motion. Next comes a detail that surprises a lot of people. The Camerlengo destroys the Fisherman's ring, the Pope's official signet ring, along with the lead seal used to authenticate papal documents. Historically, this was a genuine security measure, a way to prevent anyone from forging documents in a dead Pope's name during the vacancy, back when a wax seal was one of the only ways to verify something came from the papacy itself. Today, it's kept as formal tradition, marking a clean, symbolic end to that Pope's authority, even though modern document security obviously doesn't depend on a ring anymore. The Camerlengo also seals the Pope's private study and bedroom. Nobody enters until the next Pope is elected. It's a small detail, but it says something about how seriously the Church treats this transition. Even the physical spaces where a Pope lived and worked are treated as part of an office that has just quite literally gone silent. So who actually runs the Church during this gap? Not the Camerlengo alone, and importantly, no single person holds papal authority during this time. That's a deliberate design choice, not an oversight. Day-to-day administrative matters fall to the Camerlengo working alongside the College of Cardinals collectively. But there's a hard limit built into church law. During Sede Vacante, no major decisions can be made. No new doctrine, no new bishops appointed, no significant policy shifts. Nothing that would bind a future pope's hands before he's even chosen. It's designed purely as a caretaker period, not an opportunity for anyone to seize power, push through changes, or reshape the church while there's no one in the top seat to object. This caretaker period is also when the funeral rites begin. Traditionally, there's a 9-day mourning period called the novemdiales, 9 consecutive days of masses and prayers said for the deceased pope. This isn't just about grief, though grief is certainly part of it. Practically, it gives time for cardinals scattered across every continent to physically travel to Rome, and it gives the global Catholic faithful, over 1 billion people, a shared, structured way to mourn publicly rather than everything happening in a rush. During those 9 days, you'll typically see a lying in state period as well, where the faithful can file past the pope's body to pay their respects, along with daily masses at St. Peter's Basilica marking each stage of the mourning period. The Pope's funeral itself follows a set of traditions refined over centuries, though recent popes have simplified some elements considerably. Pope Francis, for example, requested a notably simpler funeral than his predecessors, choosing burial outside the Vatican walls entirely, at the Basilica of St. Mary Major, breaking with the long-standing custom of burial inside St. Peter's Basilica itself. It was a small but meaningful signal about how he wanted his own legacy handled, modest rather than grand. Once the funeral concludes, a clock starts ticking. Church law requires the conclave, the formal closed-door meeting where cardinals elect the new pope, to begin between 15 and 20 days after the pope's death. This window exists for a very practical reason. It gives cardinal-electors from every continent enough time to physically reach Rome while not leaving the church without a leader for too long. In earlier centuries before modern air travel, getting cardinals from distant corners of the world to Rome could take far longer, and the church has historically preferred a bounded, predictable window over an open-ended one. During this waiting period, cardinals hold what are called general congregations, meetings where they discuss the state of the church, the challenges facing whoever comes next, and informally get a sense of who among them might be ready to lead. No campaigning happens in any organized public sense. That would go directly against the spirit of the process and would be seen as deeply inappropriate. But these conversations still quietly shape how the eventual vote unfolds, since cardinals are after all getting to know each other's thinking before they're sequestered together. Not every cardinal gets a vote in the conclave itself. Only cardinal-electors do, cardinals under the age of 80 on the day the papacy becomes vacant. Cardinals older than that can still take part in the general congregations and offer input during the discussion period, but they're excluded from the actual conclave vote once it begins. It's one of the more understated rules of the whole system, but it has a real effect on who ends up choosing the next pope. There's also a cap. Current church law generally limits the number of cardinal-electors to 120, though in practice this number has occasionally crept above that figure depending on how many cardinals a given pope is appointed during his pontificate. Once the conclave formally begins, these cardinal-electors are literally locked in. That's what the word conclave actually means, from the Latin cum clave, with a key.
Historically, this wasn't just a figure of speech. Early conclaves really were locked, sometimes even semi-starved by local authorities to speed up a decision after a vote dragged on for months or years. Today, it's far more comfortable, but the spirit remains. Cardinal-electors are sequestered inside the Sistine Chapel for voting and the Domus Sancti Marthae, the Vatican guesthouse, for lodging, cut off entirely from outside communication. No phones, no internet, no newspapers, no contact with the outside world until a new pope is chosen. In an era where almost nothing stays offline, it's genuinely one of the last fully sealed-off decision-making processes left anywhere in the world.
Once sequestered, the cardinal-electors begin voting by secret handwritten paper ballot inside the Sistine Chapel beneath Michelangelo's ceiling. Each cardinal writes a name, folds the ballot, and carries it to the altar to place it in a chalice, reciting a formal oath as he does so. A 2/3 majority is required to elect a new pope, not a simple majority, which is part of why conclaves are designed to encourage consensus rather than a narrow factional win. If no candidate reaches that 2/3 threshold, the ballots are burned in a small stove inside the chapel, mixed with a chemical additive that produces black smoke, fumata nera, visible through a chimney on the Sistine Chapel roof. That black smoke is the signal to the crowd gathered in St. Peter's Square and to the entire watching world that there's still no decision. Voting typically continues in multiple rounds each day, up to 4 ballots daily, 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, until someone finally secures the necessary 2/3 support. When that finally happens, the ballots are burned again, this time with a different additive producing white smoke, fumata bianca, and the great bells of St. Peter's Basilica ring out to confirm it, in case there's any doubt about the smoke's color from a distance. Then comes one of the most quietly dramatic moments in the entire process. The senior cardinal deacon steps out onto the central balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, known as the Loggia of Blessings, and announces in Latin, Habemus Papam, we have a pope, followed by the new pope's given birth name translated into Latin and the papal name he has chosen for himself. A few minutes later, the new pope himself appears on that same balcony for the very first time as pope to bless the enormous crowd that has typically gathered below, drawn there the moment word of white smoke spreads. This entire process, the Camerlengo's rituals, the novemdiales, the general congregations, the secret handwritten ballots, the smoke signals, has been refined over roughly 800 years, largely in direct response to past conclaves that went badly. Some historical conclaves dragged on for months or even years without a decision. One in the 13th century took so long that local authorities in Viterbo reportedly removed the roof of the building where cardinals were meeting and put them on reduced rations, essentially to force a decision. Others were manipulated by outside political powers, kings and emperors who wanted a say in who became pope, sometimes pressuring or bribing cardinals directly. Every rule in the modern process exists because at some point in history, its absence caused a genuine crisis. The strict sequestration exists because outside interference used to be common. The 2/3 majority requirement exists to prevent a pope being elected by a narrow, potentially unstable faction. The fixed 15 to 20 day window exists to balance the practical needs of travel against the risks of leaving the church leaderless indefinitely. It's slow by design, it's secretive by design, and it's built to produce a decision the entire global church can trust as legitimate, even now, in an era when almost nothing else in public life stays offline, private, and unrushed for that long. To make this feel less abstract, it's worth looking at one real example. When Pope Benedict XVI resigned in 2013, itself a rare event since popes almost always serve until death, the process still largely followed this same structure, minus the funeral and mourning period since he was still alive. The see still became formally vacant, a Camerlengo still oversaw the transition period, general congregations were still held, and 13 days after the vacancy began, white smoke appeared, and Pope Francis was introduced to the world from that same balcony. It's a useful reminder that this system isn't just theoretical or something confined to history books, it's a living process that the church has used repeatedly in living memory, and will use again. That's the full picture of what happens between a pope's death or resignation and a new one stepping onto that balcony for the first time. It's a process built slowly, deliberately, and with centuries of hard lessons baked into every rule. Next in this series, we'll zoom in even further on how cardinals are actually chosen to become electors in the first place, and what really gets discussed inside those closed-door general congregations before voting even begins. If you want to follow the rest of the series, subscribe so you don't miss it, and let me know in the comments which part of this process surprised you most.